All right, we're live. Well, DJ, it's good to see you, man.
Thanks for this opportunity. It's good to see you too.
Yeah. So, we were just talking a little bit a few seconds ago about this question of why do we work, and how that impacts the way we make decisions about how we work throughout our lifetime.
Yeah.
And so, I'm curious if we kind of just dive into that, and we think about the way that we think about work in the modern world.
Yeah.
I'm curious what comes up for you.
When I think about the question, why do we work? It turns into just a memory of me asking that question to dozens, if not well over 100 people over the last decade of my life as a consultant, and people work for different reasons. We could paint with a really broad brush and say, well, they work for the money. But then the next question is, why do you need the money?
Right.
And like that might sound like a silly question to follow up. Why do you work for the money? Why do you need the money? I don't know how people might respond to hearing that, but that's a real question. Sure, you need basics. Are we talking about like shelter and food? Of course. Once you have that, how much more do you need? Well, I'd like to be able to have vacations and provide for my kids and give them a better life. Okay, once you've gotten there, then what? And then I wonder how much of it turns into a problematic pursuit for more that you don't need, and that you sacrifice your own well-being in order to have a certain level of success in your life, financial success, but it has a negative impact on your rest of your life. And that's what I've mostly been talking to people about over the last decade. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to ever weigh down someone's ambition. I really like when I work with entrepreneurs who really are trying to rocket their career to something special. And at the same time, I work with people who do their 9 to 5 or their 8 to 4. And the question is, why are you doing this? What motivates you to do this? And a lot of times they're talking about things like, well, my family, my health, my well-being. So this way, I can provide my kids an education. And when that comes up, then what I want to then turn the conversation into is, do you realize when you make your day-to-day choices at the workplace, can you keep that value in mind? Can you keep your motivation in mind? That you're working for your family, you're working for your own health and well-being, you're working to provide. Keep that in mind and just don't make it solely about the money.
Yeah.
I also wonder, when people are in that mindset, do people remember to work safely when they're on the job? Do they remember to take care of their coworkers, to make sure that they're taking care of themselves? And are they putting themselves at risk in any negative way because they've lost the vision, they've lost the viewpoint on why they're doing this? And I think making sure that you keep your values, keep what's vital, meaningful, purposeful to you as part of why you're here and why you're working so hard. Because I think when you lose that, you can get rushed, you can get a little unfocused, and that's where the stress and that's where the injuries and that's where the arguments happen. And I think if we're trying to make a better workplace for the future, I think we need to figure out a way to deal with how people are stressing themselves out. So that's something that I've been trying to work on with my colleagues over the last decade.
Yeah. And those two questions we're sort of exploring, I see, are really intimately related, which is, how do we help people in the ways where they're stressing themselves out? And how do we answer this question about why do we work? Because it sounds like that's really what we're underlining. It's not so much that even right now we want to dive into the answer to why do we work. 'Cause the answer depends on the person and has changed a little bit here and there throughout history. But the real challenge with our modern world is that people are struggling to answer that question for themselves. They're struggling to ask that question for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, as a therapist, I worked with hundreds of people in their 20s and 30s that reached this point where they were just sort of caught in a game that they hadn't really realized they had signed up for. And they built this big, bright, shiny life that felt hollow on the inside. And you were mentioning similarly that like you'd worked with so many clients that have reached that point where they're like, their life is sort of feeling hollow and they're not quite sure how they'd gotten to that point. And a huge piece of that is around how our world, and in particular our society, has changed in relation to values and values exploration. Right. We used to have these like sacred structures that we would go to on a weekly basis to explore what mattered to us and define and refine them. And organized religion had its challenges, but it also served a function where now we don't have a place where people are going and consistently asking what really matters to them. They're being influenced by influencers, by the thousands, and not really brought into this space to explore what matters to them. They're surrounded by more stimuli than any human has ever had to deal with, and have less emotionally available adults around them to help them co-regulate their nervous systems. So they're more stressed, and they're not learning crucial skills for how to feel their emotions. And the way you define your values, you have to be able to feel your emotions.
Right.
And so like we have less skills and we have less spaces for exploring our identities, for defining what matters to us, for trying to clarify that. And then we're faced with this harsh reality at moments throughout our life when we're not armed with that, which is fulfillment can't be stumbled upon. We have to have a direction to go toward. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on how do we fix that? How do we empower more people to be able to even just be asking the question more often and to be able to answer it of what matters to me? Why am I working? Who do I really want to be? What are my values?
Yeah. I think that would depend upon the developmental level of the person being asked that question.
Yeah.
Because earlier on in life, it's hard to say, this is what I know I want my life to be about.
Yeah.
But I think giving a little bit of leeway for mistakes to happen.
Yeah.
Giving some breadth of choices, reducing the judgment when people choose things and it doesn't work out, which is odd. A lot of parents, teachers, guardians, bosses might give someone a hard time for making some mistaken choices pretty early on. So I think one of the things that we need to do as a culture is understand that the youth are going to do things that didn't work out, and that's okay, you know?
Yeah.
But the other thing is like, that's just the beginning. When we have the youth, they don't know what their values are, and they don't know why they're working or what their passions, so to speak, might be. And we have to give room for mistakes to happen. But then once the choices are made and folks are either in a job that they like or don't like, they're in a process. They've got a career, they've got a mortgage, they got to pay off the car loans, they're providing for people in their lives. I think one of the more important things to do at that point is to remind them that it's not about the outcome. It's about, it's not just how much money gets deposited every 2 weeks from your employer in your bank account. It's that it does something for your life. It does something. It's not just about the money. I wish I can go really deep into this because I could probably talk about this for hours, but just how quickly conversations will turn into talking about money and finance. I just meeting people over the weekend, brand new, someone introduced themselves to me while I was hanging out at a restaurant, immediately started talking about how expensive the drinks were here and how much money they make. And
Sure.
It was odd, but then I hear the same thing. No criticism here. The same thing amongst friends and family. We talk about money all the time. Just be driving down the road. Oh my gosh, do you see how much gasoline went up? We could be talking about anything. We could be talking about things that are interesting and meaningful to us. We could talk about sports. We could talk about the song that's on. We could talk about things that are really interesting to us. But a lot of times, something happened in this culture where talking about money, I think it's just too much now.
Do you think it's happening more now than it did, say, like 6 decades ago?
Yeah. So I wasn't alive yet.
Right.
I would imagine that talking about money's still always been important.
Right.
But I think something maybe just because I got older and I'm just perceiving this a lot more. But to me, it seems to have changed over the last 10 years.
Yeah. I don't think
odd.
it's just your perception.
Yeah.
Because I think you're right that it's definitely happening more now. But I think even zooming out past the past 10 years, like when I talk to my grandparents, or I talk to my people that are just a little bit older than my parents, they talk about this time where people were talked about based on how they impacted their community.
Yeah.
Those are the people that you talked about. Like when somebody did a really cool thing, and as like communities change with residential mobility and globalization, and something started to happen where suddenly how much money you made started to matter a whole lot more.
I think, from my estimation, I think that's true. I mean, of course, any listeners right now might be criticizing, well, back in the Depression, I'm sure back in the, when people were starving and on soup lines for a really long period of time, they were talking about money then too. I just think that it just seems to have taken hold of what's going on in our culture.
What's happening in the culture is different.
Yeah.
The amount of billionaires has exploded.
Right.
It's now close to 3,000 billionaires.
Yeah.
And so like that didn't used to always be the dream for people.
Right.
People wanted to be well respected in their community and make enough money to provide for their family and buy a home. Yeah. But people weren't walking around saying how they wanted to be the next billionaire or the next millionaire. It was about making enough money to be respectable.
Right.
At least that's what we find when you look in like the books of how people talk about those times.
Yeah.
And then when you look through the last 10 years, I'm curious what your thoughts are on like, what caused that? What caused that shift in the last 10 years? Because I have a data point that like validates that it's definitely changed. One is when I started going into schools and working with kids, it was 16 years ago. And I remember the year where things shifted, where I could go in and I could talk to elementary school kids and I could ask them generally, like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Okay.
And they would say things like firefighter, doctor,
Yeah.
lawyer, nurse, car driver, taxi driver, a person that paints houses, things that they saw that were interesting.
Sure.
And then suddenly, somewhere around 2015, 2016, that started to shift, where it became professional video gamer, YouTuber, influencer, social media millionaire.
Right.
And it turned into more of these like digital-based roles, and it was focused on like when you asked why, so I want to make a lot of money and I want to be really famous.
Right. And while it would require a lot of hours of doing it, it seems simpler and definitely easier than working hard with a hard hat, PPE, steel toe boots, waking up early in the morning and going to a construction site.
Sure. Sure.
And being a firefighter, putting yourself at risk.
Yeah. Or being a plumber.
Yeah. Right. And then having to learn how to do that. I'm not saying that people who are influencers on YouTube don't have a particular talent and it didn't require work to get there. I'm not saying that.
No, it's the perception from an audience member or a viewer, the way that it can feel when you then start to estimate, well, like how hard would it be for me to start doing that?
Right. So I think to get to the root cause of this, I think why there's been this shift is because of the explosion of media. We not only have, the town crier hundreds of years ago that turned into the printing press and then ended up having newspapers, and then going beyond that having radio, and then it's TV. And I remember, I don't know if it was the late 70s or early 80s, but there was something called the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Now just think for a moment how toxic that is. People are happy, they're in their home. They just had a nice dinner, and now they're going to sit down after they have dessert as a family and look at how you don't have what they have. And just the message, I don't even think it was intentionally trying to make people feel less than, but there is something like, well, I'm watching this on a black and white TV, in 1979, and seeing that these other people have so many more resources and so much more entertainment and so much more fun, and look how they have these mansions and these boats. And I just want to know what that did to plant a seed for the next generation and the generation after that, that somehow looking at that as if that were the goal, that was a thing to aim for. Meanwhile, sitting in that living room in the 70s around people who care about you after you were well fed, even though you're in a climate controlled place, you just had dessert, your dad's next to you, your mom's next to you, your little brother's playing, and you're watching this, that was fine. That was fine for hundreds of, I don't know how long it was until we had climate controlled rooms, but I'm saying a place to live with your family and enjoying each other's company. But then all of a sudden, look what they have. Yeah. And what did that reinforce for us to look what they have, and we're not constantly, but some folks might occasionally aspire for something that they don't have because it's going to serve an unnecessary need to fulfill. You don't need those things.
Yeah, well,
but you're taught to.
It taps into something really deep within us, right? Like we are deeply wired for connection. It is how we evolved. For the vast majority of the time we've been on this planet, we're hunter-gatherer, nomads, and tribes. We are wired to connect with others. And suddenly something starts to happen that is very different about having access to TV and phones and computer screens that are continuously showing you how other humans are living their lives. Right. That is very different than the experience of looking out your window. When you're looking out your window, you are looking and saying, okay, how am I doing in comparison to the other people in my community that I live with? I want to make sure I'm staying connected with them. Right. I want to make sure I'm contributing. I want to make sure that I'm mattering, that I'm contributing and bringing my sense of worth. Yeah. And that's helpful, and that's deeply wired into us. We are wired to do that. But something very different happens when suddenly you have access to millions of people, right? Or even just you get a glimpse at people that are doing extremely better than you are, where you can fall into this trap, because we kind of always just yearn for a little bit more connection, a little bit more love, a little bit more belonging. Right. And so especially when there are moments of stress, or we've had a hard day, or things were exhausting, or we're caught up in some sort of unpleasant state, it can be easy to fall into this trap of seeing someone with something we don't have and thinking, oh, well, they seem to be doing well. They seem to be happy. Maybe that's a tangible path for me. Maybe if I can do that, then I will be more worthy of respect by other people. Maybe that will help me feel even less unpleasant than what I'm feeling now.
Yeah. I just thought of this right now while you were talking, Matt, and you were mentioning how we have a drive for connection.
Yeah.
And that you're getting a message that others have more than. But check this out.
Hit me.
Sometimes you can establish connection by pointing at the others and say, look what they have. We don't have it. And then there becomes a community of folks that feel downtrodden and victimized and angry at other folks. And I think that's a split. That's probably why our communities in so many ways are just so fractionated. I mean, by that broken.
Yeah. That common enemy intimacy.
Yeah. So I think that adds to it. That's one of the dozens of reasons why I think that there's so much strife in our communities now. It's look at how much they have.
Yeah. And when when we're in this place where most people don't know the names of their neighbors, when we're not going to places to connect with people based on our physical proximity with them,
Right.
where most of our connection is really happening digitally.
Yeah.
One of the few ways that we can create connection with others is about coming together about shared problems
Right.
and shared challenges and criticisms. But the challenge that comes with that is that common enemy intimacy requires something to blame. And it's not necessarily a bringing together of really productivity or necessarily value as much as it's standing against something.
Right.
But there's also this other layer that's like coming up I want to name, which is, while that started happening more and more, there's also a reason for it, which is our trust in institutions has been falling since the Nixon years, right?
Yeah.
With things that we've seen. And also because of the rise of media.
Right.
We now could see more, and we could see some of the ways where we were lied to or we were let down, where we saw the banking system, we saw politicians, we saw corporations doing things that didn't fall in line with what they said they were doing for us.
Yeah.
And so we just started trusting these large institutions less and less. And so now it's like, well, where's the places I can go where I can connect with people, where I can feel safe?
Right.
And so like we're, without having any of those that are based in a sense of, here's what we're going to stand for, and we're going to build trust together with people in this space, we seek connection so deeply that we're going to seek it out. And if we don't have any of those places, then our only option is to create tribes together based on the stuff we hate together.
Yep. Yeah, I think that is a danger on why there is a mental health crisis. You're not really having intimate connections with folks. Some people are, but there is a fraction.
A huge drop off.
Yeah.
A huge drop off,
go.
particularly for Gen Z compared to millennials.
Right. And you can connect with people that you've never met around a common enemy and get angrier and angrier, but never really have an intimate relationship with people. And I think that has a negative impact on mental health just in general. Yeah.
There's then a question that comes up, right? Which is what do we do about that? And I really want to invite you into that with this sort of framing, which is, often when I talk to people, I discover that a lot of their beliefs about how human behavior has changed are really not aligned with what the research says, right? So particularly with like criticism,
Okay.
right? What we see really clearly in the research for decades is even just like a praise to criticism ratio, particularly if you have a partner, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you really want to change someone's behavior, just criticism is the fast track to just totally ruining the relationship.
Right.
Whereas if you really want to change your behavior, catch them when they do it right.
Yep.
And give them praise.
Right.
But that's a really hard behavior because our brains are so much more wired to look for the negative. So you have to know that that's an important thing to do, and then you have to build the muscle for it. So that's one example. But what I found was, when I was in undergrad and grad school, going around learning about behavior science, contextual behavior science, the more I did that and the more I walked around schools and workplaces, the way I felt was sort of how I imagine a surgeon would feel if they went back in time 200 years ago and saw people doing surgery without washing their hands.
Oh, right.
Right? Like there's been all these learnings in behavior science. A line I use often is, we get that in the last 100 years, we've gone from typewriter to computer to internet to AI.
Yeah.
And that is rapid innovation because of the exponential rate of learning and the thousands of people that contributed to those learnings.
Yep.
And that same sort of rate of innovation and learning has happened with behavior science. We're far and away from where Skinner was.
Right.
Sure.
Sure.
But a lot of people just don't know about a lot of that behavior science.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's too bad. And where the behavior science is being used, it's being successful, but I don't think it's getting generalized as much. I think what happens is that when we're talking about behavior science, a lot of people are going to go off of wisdom passed down through the ages, through these sages, and
Sure.
they might not actually be helpful, but they're old hat, like they've been around for a long time, you know. Spare the rod, spoil the child. I think that's thousands
Right,
years
right,
old
right.
of a phrase that people use in parenting, which essentially justifies corporal punishment. But the science here within the last several decades is that's probably not a good way.
Really conclusively, the most likely outcome if you are hitting your child consistently is that you're going to create somebody that's violent either to themselves or others.
Yeah.
Not that you're going to make somebody that is tremendously compliant and disciplined.
Right. And I've been teaching this as a psychologist for a while. I'm also worked in the schools for a while. I'm a school psychologist. And then you teach this to folks. And folks would say stuff, well, you know, I got punished, I got hit, I got spanked when I was a kid. And look how
Right.
I turned out. And I'm like, you turned out like someone who wants to hit their kid.
Yeah.
That's not really the aim here. But I think the reason why we're on this topic is just we know things from behavior science, but some ways of doing things have been so just part of our culture
Yeah.
that to hear this new way of doing it seems odd. It seems aversive, so people kind of push it away.
Change is hard.
Yeah.
Change is hard. That's a really good point I hear you making around like one of the challenges around taking what we've learned about behavior science through the last few decades and integrating it into how we live our lives together as a society, in organizations, in families, in our own individual lives is not necessarily just getting the information there. We have the greatest tools on the planet for that. It's not really an accessibility problem.
Right.
One of the big challenges is people don't necessarily have a big openness to it. And it's really hard to let go of behaviors and the beliefs that root behaviors that we've been doing for a really long time.
Right. One of the things that I think we could use in order to help people with a willingness to change
Yeah.
would be having an influence on our youth to be more psychologically flexible.
Could you define that for folks?
Yeah. So psychological flexibility is the ability to contact the present moment, to be in the here and now. And then with an understanding that you have a history, you have some genetic influence and some early childhood learning and some experiential learning, and you have a subculture that you were raised in, you contact the present moment, and given all that stuff about you, you can learn to be willing to change what you're doing. Even if you got some habits that are problematic, you can be willing to change what you're doing. Or if it's hard, keep doing this thing that is healthy and worthwhile for you, persisting in it, because it serves the things that are vital and meaningful to your life. So psychological flexibility is being able to be in the here and now, and given all the personality that you're bringing, you can take that contact with the present moment and go, what am I doing right now? Am I doing what I care about, or am I doing something that's not really serving what I care about in my life? And then pivoting from that. That's psychological flexibility. And I think...
So just if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah.
So psychological flexibility is the ability to be present here in the moment and to adapt or persist in behaviors that align with what matter to me.
There you go. Yeah. And then, you know, a couple of parts of that are difficult. This is why I think we want to do something to help our youth. start to have this kind of psychological flexibility, right? Just the idea here with like contacting the present moment, being in the here and now, as you were saying it, according to the research, 47% of the day, what you're thinking is not what you're doing.
Right.
I mean, so I'm just going to repeat that again because half of your listeners weren't paying attention right there. 47% of the day, your thoughts are about there and then instead of here and now. 47% of the day. Give me 3 points. That's half the day. This is how powerful it is to have, the human condition, the ability to use our language to plan the future and reminisce about the past. Those are good tools, but that same tool can make us anxious about the future and ruminate about the past.
Language.
Yeah.
Because without really, it's you take a dog and you leave them out in the rain, and when you come home, they're still going to greet you. They're going to think, oh, look, you're home, you're home, you're home, you're home.
Yeah.
You leave your best friend or your partner out in the rain, and they're able to use language to ruminate and dig into all the reasons why you just never care about them, and you're always just thinking about yourself, and you can spin yourself into story. And so like language is like this amazing invention for us to like supercharge our brains and collaborate with each other and invent things and build things. And our greatest tool is also our greatest weapon against ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If that person was in the rain waiting for you and they're like, why wasn't the extra key under the mat? You said you were going to be here at 5 o'clock, but now it's 5:15 and I was out in the rain, and, sure, the dog's fine right now. I mean, he shook off all his, water from him when he went to go have some kibble and drink some water and turned around 3 times and laid down in his bed. But now here you are carrying that rumination and the resentment. You could also be having snacks with the person who just came home. You could be sitting down and, on a comfortable couch and watching television and enjoying your life. But because of languaging, because of the ability to compare things between the way you'd like them to be and the way you can imagine them to be, that is a gift and a curse. And so this person's ruminating and angry at the partner because they were 10, 15 minutes late and they had to be out in the rain. And instead of just letting that go, drying off and enjoying your life, you're ruminating and you're arguing and you're griping. And this goes back to what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, the ability to compare. Now we're comparing ourselves to the lives in Rich and Famous. Even though everything's fine in this living room, watching a black and white television, 1979 in my life, you can look at the yacht, you look at the mansion and go, and if I had that, I'd be happier, right? And so this is why I think psychological flexibility is important. One of the components, and you mentioned it, and I was talking about it too, is to contact the present moment, but also be aware of what you're doing. And like not only be aware of what's going on in the world, but can you be mindful of how you're acting in the present moment, and is it related to what you find important? Because here's the thing: you're only going to live a finite period of time on this planet. You're not going to be able to change all the things that happen to you, but you can change how you're going to respond to them. If you're on automatic pilot, you're just doing your habits, you might not be living as well as you could be. You might not be following through on what's meaningful and vital to you because you just kind of got this habitual way of living your life, and it gets reinforced by pats on the back from society, and you get your paycheck because you're doing this. I'm a good boy.
And a lot of them just get kind of picked up as we're born in a certain place within a family with certain people. We're raised at a certain school. We're surrounded by certain people that become certain friend groups, and the way those interactions go reinforce certain behaviors and beliefs. And at some points, we have to be able to pause and ask, how have I been showing up? Mm-hmm. What kind of life is that making? What kind of life is that heading toward? Right. And is that the kind of life that I want?
Right. It's a tough question.
It's really
to
tough.
Answer at times.
Really tough.
Yeah.
Really hard. I mean, I sit down with people that have, been therapists or coaches themselves, who have been, going to meditation retreats for a long time, and we'll have that conversation where they say, I think the last few years, I haven't really been asking myself why I'm doing what I'm doing, or like what my core values are. Like, I think I've changed a lot these last couple of years, And I've just kind of been doing this thing because I'm good at it. And I haven't even asked myself, like, what do I really want? I think I do want different things that I wanted a few years ago.
Yeah.
We can just sort of forget because we can be such habits of our environment. We can build a certain life and we kind of become the character playing that out. And yet that pausing is so powerful.
Yeah.
And then it's these like three different pieces. One is like the like auditing what's going on in the present moment, like you mentioned, not just what's around you, but what's happening within you.
Right.
And then it's really asking, what do I want?
Yeah.
What are my values? And being able to then think, well, what do I want to do differently? And it's really tough.
Yeah. I think it comes in certain stages in your life. I don't know how it would serve you to ask this question to yourself every day. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good idea for you to, tap in. Am I really doing what I really want to do with my life? But if you were constantly saying, is this serving my most important values all day long? It's kind of stuff. But I think that there's different moments in your life where it makes sense, or at least can be very helpful to you, if you can take that moment and say, is this really what I want to be doing with my life?
Yeah.
And when you keep answering that no for quite a few days in a row, then start bringing back that idea of psychological flexibility. And remember this definition, contact the present moment. And given who you are, can you change your behavior in the service of your chosen values?
Yeah.
And there's so many different places that we can go with this, because there's a lot of, imagine there's people listening to this saying like, but I can't change. I have to pay down my mortgage, and I got a couple of kids who are still in elementary school, and, I'm living in, a place where there's not a lot of opportunity for me to be that flexible with my life. And I get that.
Yeah.
But can you still focus on, even in this kind of restricted bandwidth, can you still make your life about the things that are meaningful to you? Because I don't want to pretend that this is just going to all be about motivational speaking. You can change your life and you can go for the gusto. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I've done this legit for way too long to think that
30 years.
Yeah, there you go. That we could use this idea of psychological flexibility and the interventions that'll get you there, that all of a sudden you're just going to revolutionize your life and you're going to live at the pinnacle and you're just going to be a multimillionaire and you're going to be a founder of a startup. No. It could help you with that. But I've also worked with folks who work in manufacturing plants, and they work on oil fields, and they work as construction workers, and all this stuff serves their needs. They are the folks who make this world work. And sometimes when they have that dark night of the soul, what am I doing this for? This stuff still works for that too.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, well, I'm going to quit everything I'm doing and, go play jazz saxophone in an improvisational jazz trio somewhere, and I'm just going to really care about my art. Once you've made some decisions and choices in your life, then, well, you've got some responsibilities there. Can you still be psychologically flexible in that situation, even if you don't have a lot of opportunity to do brand new things? Can you find meaning in the day-to-day?
Yeah.
Because that's an important thing that I think folks would do well to learn, is that the rigmarole, right? The day-to-day, the traffic and the crummy coworker and the dog that barks next door when you're trying to take your nap on a Saturday afternoon. There's real things in your life that are just going to be a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
And I think psychological flexibility is a contributor to your own mental health, realizing that things aren't going to be perfect, but you can figure out to have a life well lived even in the presence of these frustrating and anxiety-provoking and angering situations.
When I first started exploring meditation, there was this story that somebody told. I then heard it a couple times. I think the first time I heard it, it was when I was learning about diffusion.
Okay.
And the story goes like this: there are these two monks, and they're walking along, and they have very strict rules at their monastery. They're not allowed to touch or even look at women. Yeah. And they come to a river. Yeah. And if you know the story?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I might have heard it from you for all I know. But they come to this river, and there's a woman there who's struggling to cross, and the older monk helps her cross, and had to somewhat lift her and set her down, and then they go walking along, and they walk for miles. And after many miles, the younger monk just, I can't take it anymore. Yeah. I cannot believe that you touched that woman. And the older monk goes, I set that woman down miles ago, and here you've been carrying her all this way?
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're still carrying her, right? Just how much of that story is true for anyone listening to this right now?
Right.
Just holding on to bitterness, resentment. This isn't how the world was supposed to be. Oh, this isn't just about, the two monks. This is an allegory of what it's like to be a human being, to have an experience. It's supposed to be this way. Things don't work out that way. Then it's over. And you're still carrying that kind of stuff around. Now, I'm not pretending that I don't also have a little bit of aggravating memories and things that happened in the past, and there are traumatic events that are going to happen in people's lives, and I'm not just going to say you should just put it down. Sure. And can you catch yourself when you are carrying those rules and that anger and that frustration and say, can I just really notice this a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, and even the one example that comes to mind as we're talking about this, years ago when I was working a lot as a therapist, there was a time where I was seeing a lot of clients online, and I had this first session with this woman. I had no information, and it was over the phone, basically. She wanted to have her screen off, so it was basically a phone call.
Okay.
Within the first few minutes, we learned that 2 days ago, her husband was killed in a tragic accident. Ooh. And she has 2 sons, and she's been laying in bed all day, filled with grief and stress, and hasn't been eating. Mm-hmm. And she said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have these 2 young boys I'm not taking care of. Yeah. And I'm just this pathetic piece of shit just laying in my bedroom. Yeah. Wow. And that's like, wow. Like, one, I just took a deep breath, and I just said, one, like, I'm amazed that you're on the phone with me right now.
Yeah, good.
I'm amazed that you're even thinking about what your boys need. Like, what a tremendous impact to your life. Like, what a tremendous loss. I'm so sorry. Right. And I don't know what we're going to do in this conversation, but I just want you to know I am here. I'm here to support you. We can explore this and figure out some things to do, but I also have one request. And she said, okay, what? I was like, I have 2 questions. Could you answer them? She said, okay. And I said, scale 0 to 10. How much do you think you're beating yourself up for the way that you're feeling right now and the way that you might be feeling like you're failing?
Okay.
And she said a 10 or 11 out of a scale of 10. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay. Second question. In this conversation, could we find something that could turn that down?
Okay.
And she said, am I allowed to? And so there's this like challenge that comes with the challenging things that we feel, which is pain hurts. Yeah. And there's an uncertainty that comes with it. Right. And a frustration, and we don't like uncertainty. And so, like, the most vulnerable emotion to feel is sometimes something like joy, because it's like all those stories of a parent that looks at a child as they're sleeping and then immediately feels panic, like, oh my God, what if something terrible happens to me or happens to them? Because it's our psyche is just, they're open and vulnerable with something like joy, where, oh gosh, I don't have something to plan for. I don't have something to latch onto, to have a sense of control, to have a sense of predictability. And so we can do that with positive emotions. We can then spiral ourselves into judgment. And we can do that with painful experiences where there's something painful and it seems so vast. I need to find some sort of way to contain it so I don't feel so overwhelmed by it. I need somewhere to blame it. And so it's so much simpler if I could have one place to put my blame. And so we can often just fall into this cycle. It's not about, trying to pretend that your life is fluffy and filled with rainbows and butterflies 24/7, because that's not what life is.
Nope.
Life is filled with a ton of hurt.
Yeah.
And can you just acknowledge that it's not helpful to layer in extra judgment and shame to try and blame yourself, as opposed to just trying to feel what you're experiencing?
Yeah. And I want to layer on top of that,
Please.
a little bit more. It's not just not let yourself beat yourself up, but in addition, show self-compassion. Show to yourself that you're somebody that deserves care too. And the person who can care for you the best is probably you at this point. Right? You know what your needs are. Maybe you're not going to be able to access all of them, but maybe you're going to be able to access some of them. The story of you telling me about that telehealth client, just like the phrase self-compassion just kept coming up. I think it's not only stop beating yourself up, let's reduce the temperature of how much aversiveness you're allowing yourself to feel. But it's like, this is your only life on this planet. And you're only going to be here for a finite period of time. And if you could do things to care for who you are, even in the presence of pain. I'm not saying feel better, but just really truly mourn and grieve. I think, and it sounds like we're talking about your telehealth client, but I really mean this for like absolutely everybody listening. And I hope this never happens to you, and it will for lots of people. But maybe a spouse will die, but there's more to that. There's just people will betray you. Your favorite team's going to lose. Your kid's not going to get into the college that they want to. You're going to want to show up on time for a party, and there's going to unfortunately be a traffic jam. And you're going to be like, it's just constant. There's a certain degree of aversiveness, frustration, difficulty that happens. I mean, the first noble truth, according to the Buddhists, is that life is suffering. There are going to be aversive events that happen, and I want folks to be willing to see what they could do to manage that, sure, but realize you can't control everything that happens. And so, are you willing to accept the fact that not everything's going to work out your way, and I mean this, even be content with that. Like that, this is it. Things don't always work out the way that they're going to, that I would like them to, but can you be willing to have that and have the self-compassion that you don't have to beat yourself up. And right now, if you're in that situation like your client was experiencing, and this is strange that I'm thinking about this now, I get that you're thinking about your kids, but that somewhat cliche and kind of cheesy phrase, like, as they say when the plane is about to take off, when the masks fall, put the mask over your face before you put them on the faces of people you have to take care of. Like
100%.
There has to be something that, that self-compassion, that self-care is really important. There's just surprises, and I'm not looking for any sympathy right now, but I was on the train to get here, and I found out my aunt passed away. Like, I just got a phone call from my mother,
I'm so sorry.
And it's like, it's 88 years old, had a great life.
Wow.
Every time I hung out with her, it was a lot of fun. She lived in Northern California. We'd go out for sushi all the time whenever I would go out there and visit. She ran a marathon. I ran a marathon. We connected a lot. It was really
Wow.
cool. And so there was no real... there's no heartbreak in it. I mean, sure, there's mourning.
Sure.
But, 88 years old, had a great life, and I had a great connection with her, and so you don't know. Hey, I'm on my way to go hang out with Matt and do a podcast. Boom, train ride here, I find out that a family member dies, and just things are going to continue to happen that you can't possibly predict when they're going to. And then you're going to feel difficult emotions. And then if you could really touch in with your own humanity and realize this is part of this ride. It's part of it. And when you push it away, when you try not to have it, you say, I just want to be happy all the time, and I only want my positive emotions. Good luck, because that's not what it's like to be a human being. But I'm not saying this stuff to be depressing. Not saying it in any way to be like, woe is us. It is the yin and the yang.
Well, it's almost the exact opposite, actually, which is what you can't selectively numb emotions.
Yeah.
And so when we try to control and avoid the stuff that hurts, what we inevitably end up doing is robbing ourselves of the opportunity to feel the stuff that lights us up.
Yeah.
And so if we want to have the capacity to experience our greatest joys, we have to also build the capacity to feel our deepest sorrows.
Yeah. Yep. Without a doubt. Unquestionably. I've been very fortunate for the last 30 years, and this month is the 30-year anniversary. It
Wow,
was,
congrats.
Memorial Day weekend, 1994, I learned about acceptance and commitment therapy.
Wow.
So I've been doing something called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's kind of the bedrock of everything we've been talking about today. Yep. And in the 30 years, what I can definitely say is, and a surprising amount of people's pain is because they're unwilling to have the human condition. They're unwilling to just have the things that show up that gives them pain, and then they turn it into suffering.
Yeah.
I don't want to have this. So I don't want to have this anxiety, so I'm going to crunch Vicodin and wash it down with scotch. Great. Nice job picking up a substance use disorder. Right. I mean that in a bit snarky, and I'm not trying to be mean to people who have it. I'm just saying I don't like feeling anxious, so you know what? I'm not going to go to the barbecue or the block party.
Right.
Great. So now you're starting to build up a social phobia, right? I don't like to feel this particular kind of anxiety, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash my hands every time I've shaken someone's hands. I've put my hand on a handrail. I've put my hands on a doorknob. And now that I'm out and interacting with the world, I feel anxious. So you end up washing your hands with bleach and Brillo pads and 140-degree Fahrenheit water 70, 80 times a day.
Yep.
Now you've picked up an obsessive-compulsive repertoire. It's a lot of times the unwillingness to just have what's naturally showing up,
Yeah.
I think you used the phrase negative emotions a little bit earlier. Maybe you used the word positive emotion. It doesn't matter which one you said.
Right,
That one would imply that there are negative emotions makes me think it might be a good idea for us to do a quick and easy swap with that first word. I don't like negative emotions.
Yeah, you can try unpleasant, or you can try
Natural.
painful.
Natural
right?
emotions.
But they're all just natural emotions.
Yeah, natural emotions. Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's an important take home from acceptance and commitment therapy than anybody.
There are
can
no
use.
bad feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And just for folks listening, I'm gonna try and summarize what ACT is, and feel free to correct me.
Okay.
But most people have heard about something called CBT, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy, which a couple decades ago was like a huge innovation in the field. Cognitive behavioral therapy basically said, your behaviors are connected to your thoughts, and your thoughts are connected to your emotions. So it's like a triangle. All those things are connected to each other. And cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea is, your thoughts are related to your behaviors, so we're going to try and change your thoughts. So ACT is different. As opposed to trying to change your thoughts, it's about your relationship with your thoughts. It's about your relationship with your emotions, your relationships with your behaviors.
Yeah. There you go.
Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, it's just reiterating what you're saying, that when you're doing CBT, you're trying to change the form of the person's thoughts, to try to change it from like an irrational thought to a rational thought, to change it from a distorted thought to a clearer thought. And I am not saying that stuff doesn't help sometimes, but it doesn't work perfectly.
Sure.
So CBT has its place, but what ACT adds to it is, it's not that you're going to change the form of your thought, but the function of a thought. You can have a thought, and it doesn't have to have an influence on you, right? It doesn't have to have an influence on you. What I like to do is, give this, and if you're just listening, it's not going to make any sense. But on the video, you'll see what I'm saying is like, I can't raise my right hand.
Right.
No matter what I do, I couldn't possibly raise my right hand. And here I am waving it back and forth. I can tell myself things that I can't do, but my overt behavior is different. Or I could say something, and this is a little bit more incendiary here, but like, if I don't raise my right hand in 2 seconds, then I'm gonna get into a disfiguring car collision on my way home tonight. 1,000, 2, 1,000. And if you're listening, Matt will agree and endorse that I haven't raised my right hand, right?
Right, that's right.
So language or thoughts, like the ones that I was just talking about, they don't have to have an influence on you. Whether you change the thoughts or not, you can have a completely different relationship with your thoughts. You can think something like, I can't raise my right hand, or I have to raise my right hand, and it doesn't actually have to have an influence on you. Now, this isn't just me goofing off. Think about, and I'm just talking to you, listener, right now, what kinds of thoughts do you have that have a negative impact on you living a life that's meaningful to you? And then can you realize that thought doesn't actually have to be an obstacle to you? You don't even have to change the thought. You can just relate to thoughts differently. And when you do that, whole new avenues for your journey open up when you just relate to your thoughts differently.
Yeah, and so in a lot of this conversation, we've been talking about psychological flexibility and ACT and some of these core skills that are a part of strengthening psychological flexibility and are key components around the ACT model. And in your latest book, Breathe and Bring the Heat, you talk about how those same skills and those frameworks can really benefit an athlete who cares about performance.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that, and especially the 6 opponents and the 6 skills that we use to overcome the challenges with those 6 opponents, if you could.
Yeah. So I appreciate that introduction there. Once again, very fortunate to be doing this stuff for 30 years, this ACT stuff. And one of the ways that we talk about acceptance commitment therapy and how it can help out anybody, it doesn't just have to be someone who's dealing with some kind of mental health issue. And as mentioned, I use it for athletes, that there's 6 components to it. There's 6 ways for you, even if you're not an athlete, listening to this. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur or you're having troubles with, your partner, or you're a parent, or working on your own health and well-being, it doesn't matter. There are 6 things to take a look at, and one of them that I'll start out with is clarifying your values. Finding out what's personally meaningful and vital to you. Not a lot of folks take the time to start to clarify what's purposeful. Like, you're only going to be on this planet for a finite period of time, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. You can't change all the things that happen to you, but you can change the way you're going to react to it. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, said, in between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is where he started to talk about your values. When things happen, how are you going to be as a person? What are you going to do with that? And then that's going to lead to your response. So
how do we figure out what our values are?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite exercise or a process you've seen work well?
The one that I'll sometimes do, if it has to be an exercise, is I'll say, let's talk about your 80th birthday party.
Yeah.
Let's talk about like who you want to be there and what you're going to talk about, how you're going to reminisce, and if the youth are there and they ask, how did you have a life well lived? What do you want to be able to say? Now, 80th birthday party exercises aren't going to work for a lot of 20-somethings, and I hate this part when I say, all right, fine, make it your 50th birthday party. And It sounds like an old person, but I'm 54, so that's why I really don't like that so much. But you can look back like in a celebratory time.
Yeah.
How do you want to look back on your life? And I don't want your answers to be, this is what I want to impress people. I don't want
not the person I want other people to perceive me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you want to have lived your life when you look back in your 80th or your 50th birthday party and say this is what was meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So when you clarify your values, I'm going to go a little bit deeper, but I can't, and it'll take me a half hour to really walk through this, but I'll try to be succinct. I think the best way for me to help my clients and the people I coach clarify their values is I take a look at what they've been doing for the last day or for the last week. And then ask
there are a bunch of decisions within there.
Yeah. Why? Why have you been doing this? And then keep doing the root cause analysis. Why is that your answer? Why was that your answer? Why was that your answer? And so there's this idea from a book called The Toyota Way, right? It's by Taiichi Ono. And he says that you got to ask the question, you got to do the exercise, the 5 whys, and ask the question, why that? Well, then why that? Well, then why that? You can go past 5. If it takes 6, then it's fine. Why are you doing this right here, right now? Why? And so that's something that I think folks could take a look at and then make sure that you dig it a little bit deeper before you just say, well, the reason why I work, going back to that, is for the money. Yeah, but why do you need the money? Because I want to be a good dad. Why do you want to be a good dad? I don't know. That's really what I want to do with my life. I don't have a reason. It's something that I care about. Boom, right there.
Right. We found a core value.
Yeah, right. So, but that's just one out of the 6. Is start to clarify your values. And what I've asked my athletes, and just a quick mention, the team that I wrote this book for ended up winning the NCAA national championships, men's championships for volleyball, and I was really proud of them.
You can't get a better endorsement than that.
No doubt, right. And so I've worked with other athletes, and mostly using the idea of these 6 components. So one of them is just like clarify your values.
And what does that help us do as an athlete or as somebody that cares about performing really well?
See if you can make it personal. This is getting deep. You might be thinking that the values influence you to play well in the middle of the game. But this is really important to understand. That's not when people become champions. It's not that they executed this awesome serve right now and their values made them serve an ace, or the values made this person make a hole in one. Or it's not that. It's that your values influence you to make sure you get to practice 10 minutes early, to not go to the fraternity party the night before the competition, to make sure you go to the weight room, to make sure that you have respectful conversations with your teammates and your coaches. See, what I'm talking about here is a true psychological change. It's not just, if you clarify your values, you're going to be a better athlete when you perform in the middle of the game.
Right.
The reason why you're going to be a better athlete when it's performance time is because your values influenced you to practice well, take care of yourself, proper nutrition, hydration, communication with your teammates. So I want to really throw that in here. As I've been doing sports psychology, it's not just about what happens when there are seconds left on the clock. The only reason why you're going to be good at seconds left on the clock is because you've been good all season and in preseason, and you've been working on yourself on the regular.
So clarifying your values empowers you to align your actions day to day more closely with what those values are, so that then in the moments that matter most, you can show up in ways most aligned with those values.
There you go. Right. Good summary.
It's interesting. It also, I see a connection here to where we started this conversation, which is the sort of trap of comparison and consumerism that we see in today's culture, which is we have this innate drive to feel like we're making a sense of progress. Again, 97% at least of the time Homo sapiens were on the planet, hunter-gatherer nomadic tribes, didn't have major skills for agriculture. You stay in a place too long, use up all the resources.
There you go.
So you got to keep wandering. That's where our dopamine system comes from. New adventures, new food, new sexual partners. So we're looking for novelty and progress. One of the things that clarifying our values does is suddenly you've given yourself this North Star in the sky that you can always be feeling like you're getting a sense of progress toward. That when you don't have it, you default to then the things that you can see and touch. But if you really define your values, then now suddenly you're not showing up to practice to avoid getting criticized by your coach or to get like a pat on the back from somebody. Instead, you're showing up to practice because it's building this behavior that you want to see progress in because you care about it, and you can feel a sense of like a dopamine boost just because you're getting a little bit better and putting a little bit more effort into something that inherently matters to you.
Yeah.
So we get to unlock this motivation. And we get to unlock these doorways to fulfillment that otherwise just aren't there.
Yeah, right. So it's not just about the short-term rewards, but rather the long-term vitality, the purpose to this.
So clarifying our values unlocks more sustainable effort, it sounds like.
I think so, because of a few things here. That when you can clarify your values, then the things that are short-term painful actually can turn into something still rewarding to you. Like I care about becoming a better athlete. Let's just say that.
Sure.
I care about my own growth as an athlete and as a competitor. That's not a goal. And it's something you can do for a long period of your life.
A goal would be like I want to bench press more. I want to increase my batting average.
Right. And then when you do that, whenever you work to be a better competitor, to kind of push the edges for yourself, that's going to be painful. You have to wake up early. You have to forego eating some delicious kind of snacks. You have to work really hard. Let's say you're doing HIIT training according to your conditioning coach. High intensity interval training is not fun, but I'm not doing it for the short-term reward. I'm doing it for the long-term value, the North Star. I'm not letting myself get governed by what's immediately gratifying, like just sleeping in and resting. I'm changing something that's aversive, getting out of bed and doing the HIIT training. I'm doing something painful because of what I care about. It changes something aversive into something you can actually find rewarding. Yeah. If you don't have that clarification, if you haven't authored what your values are, then that short-term interaction with the world, it's going to govern you. Oh man, practice is such a pain in the neck. HIIT training, not today. And then you're not letting your values guide you. You're letting the short-term gratification guide you. And I don't think that's a life well lived. Yeah. You ever talk to someone who says, I just feel stuck in my life. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah, the reason why is because they don't have a North Star.
Right. Well, or they've lost touch with it.
Yeah.
And
right. Good point.
Often what happens is it's like I either didn't define this, or I got so caught up in something that I was stepping deeper into the fog and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And now I'm not even sure how the hell I climbed my way out.
Right.
And it's like, you didn't actually define what really mattered to you, why you were really here.
Yeah.
And like you have to really get deep into it.
Yep.
And define that. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the fog.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's why I think it's a good idea for us to make sure, whether we're talking about athletes or anyone, to clarify what their values are.
Yeah, all right, so that's number one out of 6.
Yeah. I think the next thing that I'll talk about, not that it goes in this particular order, but another skill that contributes to psychological flexibility and being a more committed athlete or anything else, is an ability to be in the here and now, an ability to contact the present moment. Here's the thing. The only time you can ever do anything is now.
Right.
That you can't do anything tomorrow. You're not going to do anything yesterday.
Right.
You can't do anything 5 minutes from now or 5 minutes ago. Now is the only time you can ever do anything. But as mentioned, 47% of the day, your thoughts are about there and then instead of here and now.
Right.
So what if we could relate differently to these thoughts that bring us into the there and then? If you really care about what you're doing, it makes a lot of sense to pay attention to what you're doing. Half the day, you're not really paying attention to it. Now, I'm not saying if you're in the middle of something, right, you're about to do a free throw or you're about to do some kind of trade at work as a financial worker, I'm sure you're highly likely to be in the present moment then. But given the human condition, there will be times when you're not. And 100%. It'll be problematic. So this is why I teach people about mindfulness. Now, I don't really like talking about mindfulness. and it's not because of what folks might think. I just think I get a lot of pushback.
Sure.
I work, at Cutter Steel, the Dubai Electrical and Water Authority. I got a group of Boilermakers down in Jackson, Alabama, at a manufacturing plant in central Wisconsin. If I walk in there and I say, hey, what we're going to start doing is mindfulness exercises, I think I'm going to get a lot of pushback. I'm
going to get laughed out of the room.
Yeah, this is hippy-dippy nonsense.
Yeah.
So I mostly call it situational awareness. It's a term that gets used in the military, gets used in industrial organizational psychology. And situational awareness is the ability to engage in task demands when there are external and internal distractors. That's mindfulness.
Right. It's a fancy way of saying mindfulness.
Yeah. So I teach people about situational awareness exercises. This way they are more in the present, and I also help people clarify what their values are. But then there's four other things.
It's important to highlight you have to practice being in the present moment.
Yeah.
That we become what we practice.
Yeah.
And so behaviors have to get reinforced. And a key piece that you highlighted there is you have to relate with your thoughts differently in order to be here and now.
Yeah.
Because all those thoughts about that thing that you said you were going to do that you weren't sure you wrote down somewhere, that thing you forgot to get at the grocery store, or that one judgment that keeps coming up from that weird thing you said a couple days ago, those thoughts are still going to come up.
Yeah.
But most of the time we end up just chasing them or arguing with them.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've seen in my work a lot, which is when we're talking about mindfulness, sometimes we can get caught in thinking that it's bare knuckling the present moment. I can't make my thoughts stop. Well, yeah, because nobody can, because that's what the brain does, is it makes thoughts. It's really great that it does that.
Yeah.
The key is, can you relate with those thoughts differently and practice? And that when you actually create the space and you show up with that curiosity as opposed to that judgment or avoidance, presence is actually there waiting to be found. But you have to practice rooting into it. Right. Otherwise, you won't be there. And it's important to highlight, I highlight all the time, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant meditated viciously. Two of the most competitive guys in sports ever, who were the most disciplined guys that worked their asses off.
Right.
And they were meditating all the time.
Yeah.
It was crucial. In fact, they had a meditation coach that was on the Bulls and the Lakers staff, George Mumford, who studied with John Kabat-Zinn, who's the mindfulness guy in the West.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing fluffy-duffy about it. And it's not about ignoring hard work. In fact, it is the crucial skill for living in the modern world with so many things to pay attention to.
Right.
That it's about strengthening and reclaiming our power with our attention, and that it takes practice.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, Mumford wrote that book, The Mindful Athlete.
Yeah.
Phil Jackson, one of the winningest coaches in North American sports, he wrote a book called Sacred Hoops, and he would bring the Chicago Bulls, who three-peated twice, into the center circle at practice and do mindfulness exercises with the likes of, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. And so it is not hippy-dippy nonsense. I swear on everything sacred to me, it's not. I mean, I don't want to go on a 6-hour webinar right now. I talk about this all the time, but I mean, I was raised blue collar. I was raised, just working class, and I'm used to the pushback to mindfulness. I really, honestly am, because I go into oil refineries. I go into mines. I have been to manufacturing plants, and I'm around people just like I was. I used to be an electrician's apprentice. I used to be a roofer. I know what the pushback is. I do.
Sure.
And it really is effective. It won't be effective the first time you do a mindfulness exercise. It won't be effective the first week you do mindfulness exercises. Imagine for some, if we were talking about this a different way, if somebody were physically weaker, we'd have to go to the gym and do exercises.
Right. And you couldn't do it 3 times a year.
Yeah, right. There you go.
And then expect muscle to grow.
Or after the first day, or even after the first week. But if you keep it up, then you won't be physically weaker anymore. You will get stronger through the repetitions, through the, physiological changes, through the ability to commit to this. Well, we call them mindfulness exercises because it's the same thing. So I think it's important for folks to understand that, this ability to contact the present moment, you've been hardwired and also culturally conditioned to not be in the present moment.
Right. And intentionally.
Yeah.
Our technologies that are the heyday, that have the most resources, that are pervasive throughout how we live our life, are intentionally designed in ways to try and have you engage more in their content and to compete for your attention. It's called the attention economy. Our attention is being competed with. And those tools, the way that we utilize them, reinforce that continuous partial attention. Yeah. And so it wires our brain that way. And so we have to rewire it to actually be able to be present with life because the technologies around us are wiring the opposite.
Yeah. So to follow this up, just because I don't want to call it the other side of the coin, because I think that could be argued, but another part of this, out of these 6, we're talking about contacting the present moment, being in the here and now.
Yep.
But then that also means that you relate to your thoughts differently. And so you mentioned this phrase a little while ago, diffusion, or noticing your thoughts. If we're teaching people about mindfulness exercises, one of it is to say, and it doesn't always have to be breathing, but oftentimes we start out mindfulness exercises. Mindfulness 101 is teach people to pay attention to their breath. But it could be other things, like pay attention to how your butt feels in the chair. You give them a raisin. This is how it feels to have this raisin on your tongue. You can go for a walking meditation. There's lots of different things that you can do. So what we do with that is we encourage people to contact the present moment. But then there's going to be thoughts. There's going to be memories. There's going to be some kind of private language that takes them away from contacting the present moment. And we're going to teach them mindfulness 101. Notice that thought as if it were a leaf on a stream. Most people who have been through one mindfulness training have probably heard something like this before. I don't like doing that. I like to say, hey, if you have a thought, just imagine this thought is printed out on a banner being carried by the color guards in this marching band in a parade. I'm talking to the athletes.
Yeah.
And just whatever it is that you're thinking, just imagine it's distant from you. You can observe it. You can observe it with curiosity. It isn't you because you're observing it. Yep. And you can think about that thought and watch it just march on by, and then bring yourself back to contacting the present moment, doing the thing that you care about, your values. So now it's starting to integrate, right? Now we've talked about 3. Notice that you're having thoughts and don't get hooked by them. Contact the present moment and be influenced by your values, what's personally meaningful to you. And so that means there's 3 other things, and one of them is acceptance. And what I mean by acceptance, and acceptance can mean different things to different people in different situations. When I'm talking about acceptance in ACT, I'm talking about a willingness to have your emotions, your sensations, your urges. What if you could realize that as a human being, you're sometimes going to feel mad, nervous, angry, frustrated, irritated, guilty, and then not look at those as negative emotions, but just natural emotions.
But I don't like having them.
Yeah, right.
So what do I do about that?
Yeah, a couple of things. You don't like having them because they are uncomfortable. 1, And two, you were taught by parents, guardians, teachers, rabbis, priests, and pastors, friends, and the literature you consume that these are negative emotions and you're not supposed to have them.
They're problems.
Yeah, right. So I am going to first say that you were taught to call them negative emotions. You were taught, you're just supposed to be happy. Don't worry, be happy, right? So you get this kind of stuff like when you're being brought up, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Calm down. What are you getting mad at me for? Don't get angry at me. Can't you just be happy about this? There, dry your tears. What are you worried about? You got nothing to worry about. You hear me rant? Like, these are all the things that we're raised around this kind of viewpoint on our own emotions. So no wonder I don't want to have them. You've been conditioned by society to not have them. So that's one thing, and we want to work with that in acceptance commitment therapy and breathe and bring the heat. But the same thing, like it's just see if you could check this out. They're uncomfortable because something's going on. You've been given this gift from your ancestors that you feel this way because something has changed in your environment, and in one way or another, it's problematic. You feel fear because you heard a noise in the dark. You feel guilt because you took too many resources away from your friends and your family. You feel sad because your aunt passed away. And that's a change in my life that I'm not going to have sushi in Northern California with this person who we both ran a marathon with. So, like, I don't want to feel this way, but I also, as an ACT therapist, I want to allow myself to feel sad. I'm going to accept that I'm sad about this because I'm mourning the loss of somebody that I cared about. You mentioned this before, like inside the pain, there is the purpose. You were mentioning that about a half hour ago. And so what I would teach people about this idea of acceptance is, sure, these are emotions that are uncomfortable, and they're part of the human condition to have them. They're messages that have evolved with us, and I think that they're a gift. Now, if you're listening to this and you're in pain because you're grieving or something really crummy happened in your life, you're feeling this pain saying, how dare he say that this is a gift? And then give it some time and really see if you can connect with your values and understand that this is part of the human condition to feel pain. And the reason why you're feeling it is because you cared about something and things didn't work out the way you wanted them to. Welcome to the planet.
Yeah.
But the idea of being willing to have life on life's terms and directly contact the things that are part of your life will help you ultimately behave effectively at the things you care about.
Yeah. And one of the things I've found really interesting is how we come to acceptance with acceptance. So it was really hard for me.
Okay.
When I first started really on my healing journey, I was an addict as a teenager.
Okay.
And for most of my life, I really didn't feel any emotions other than like stressed, angry, and numb.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I was a kid with ADHD, caused a lot of challenges, became an addict, and was like taking stuff to shove down anything that was in the way of me acting out the persona I wanted. Yeah. And so I struggled. I couldn't really feel many positive emotions anymore. So like life started to get a little cloudy and dark, and a deep sense of loneliness and just like meaninglessness. And so like that's one of the pieces for us to layer in, is that when we choose not to explore acceptance, again, we can't selectively numb emotions. Right. And so those things that we experience that are painful contribute to our experience of being alive. And if we're really honest with ourselves, the things that are most precious to us wouldn't exist without our pain, meaning our relationships.
Yeah.
I didn't feel a deep sense of connection with people for a very long time because I couldn't feel any of the painful experiences, and I couldn't talk about them. I couldn't create connection from that place.
Right.
But the more skills that I built, then there was this weird discovery I found, which was suddenly the like friendships and relationships that I had were so much deeper and richer because I could empathize with painful experiences they had. They could show me non-judgment and empathy, and then things that I felt shame about feeling, suddenly I wouldn't feel anymore, and instead I felt recognized.
Right.
And that experience doesn't happen without pain being part of the equation. And so sometimes even just working with clients, there's a meditation practice called Tonglen,
Okay.
which is, there's if you Google happiest man alive, the face and name that will come up is a monk named Matthew Ricard.
Okay.
He was the monk that was studied with I think his name is Richard Davidson out of Wisconsin for meditation studies.
Okay.
And they wanted to study self-compassion and meditation. So they asked him to get in the MRI and to think about something painful. And so he did that for a few minutes, and then he stopped them. He said, no, get me out of here. This is not how this works. You can't just breathe in. You also have to breathe out. And so they went back in and he did it, and then they looked at his brain and they saw these deep compassion centers there. And his pain centers would light up, but then they wouldn't anymore. He would feel them quickly. Because that's one of the things that we've learned through the last few decades. That when you really feel emotions, it takes like 90 seconds to feel the embodied experience of an emotion. It's often our judgment that keeps it stuck.
Yep.
But the other piece that he did, and what Tonglen practice is all about, is experiencing the pain and then breathing out recognition of what it connects you to. So one experience is maybe like thinking about a friend of yours that is in deep pain. And then when we see someone that we care about that's in deep pain, we have this natural urge to want to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that, you can imagine that pain, you can imagine where it would be in your body, you could open up to it and feel that, and really on the in-breath feel that, and on the out-breath send them something, whether it's compassion or ease or love, whatever you would add in there. And now that pain has become another layer of connection between you and the universe, you and your reality, but it has given you a sense of action that goes along with it. That acceptance doesn't have to be resignation to just sitting in a pit of despair.
Right.
But you can't get to effective action if the acceptance isn't a part of it.
Good point. Yeah. A willingness to have what shows up in order to go ahead and move forward on the things that you value. Yeah, it's all related. Yeah, all this stuff is kind of ping-ponging around, right?
Right.
Yeah, all the stuff that we're talking about that contributes to this psychological flexibility.
So let's track back. We've named skills of defining your values.
Yeah, what you care about.
Practicing mindfulness.
Yeah, being in the here and now.
Being in the here and now. Acceptance.
Yeah, accepting.
What else we got?
Diffusion, right?
Diffusion.
We talked about that. I call that noticing.
Yep.
And then another one that I like to call it the I am experience. Imagine that is a whole sentence, though. I am. Subject, verb.
I think I've seen you do an exercise where everyone has like a sheet of paper that says I am, like 100 times on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what happens, it just says I am, and then it's actually a fill in the blank. Then now you actually answer it 100 times, and you start saying all these different things about yourself. And then you start to also realize that if it's all these things, it's none of these things. You were talking about Eastern philosophy a little bit ago, and we have this kind of viewpoint. If it's everything, it's no thing. If you are all of these different things, none of those things are you. You, the I am experience, you're just you. And you've been you your whole life. You're just a context. And all the time you try to label it, it restricts who you are. There's just you, you know? I work for the Wounded Warrior Project. I'm one of the psychologists that helps contribute to their programs there. And what we try to do is help them realize that you're not your injuries, you're not your labels, you're not your body, you're not the things that happened to you when you were, in combat. There's something about you that's been you your whole life, and it's unbroken and it's unchanged. And I know that that component of ACT helps out people who have PTSD. Now, for folks who are listening, there's something about you too. You also have something about you that's been you your whole life. And, I'm not going to do a meditation here and some kind of exercise, but I just, want if you're listening to this, since you're listening to this, not if we're in the middle of, podcast, you are listening to it. Since you're listening to this, I just want you to think about something that happened to you last summer. And then realize that you can take a perspective and you can take that point of view and you can, watch your memories like it's a movie. And then now I want you to realize is that point of view that was having that perspective on your life, that you can rewatch that movie, that you that was there then is here now. Listening to this podcast, doing whatever else you're doing. And then we can do the same thing with memories from your teenage years. And then we can go back and look at some of the memories from early childhood. And if you did this exercise and you started to really vividly remember all these things that have happened in your life, they happened to you. They happened to this core you. Something about you is unbroken, unchanged, it's steadfast, it's strong, and it doesn't matter what might have happened in your life, there's still something about you that was present for all of your experiences. And I just call this the I am experience. It goes a little into the spiritual area, talking about the core self, the observer you, the witness, or some people go as far as to call it the soul. Something about you has been you your whole life. And when I'm talking to my athletes, just to make this really practical, you please. Can be, getting ready to step in the batter's box and the bases are loaded and, it's the bottom of the ninth and there's 2 outs, and then now you're going to start saying like, I am too nervous to do this. I am such a failure. I've struck out before. I am an imposter. I am not as good of an athlete. I am someone who shouldn't be in this batter's box. I wish somebody else in the dugout was here. And all this I am, and then they add words. I am, and then they add words. And all that stuff is just language. There's something about you that's been you your whole life. What if you could just focus? I am. Period. Done. And now, here comes the 6th. Commit to the actions.
Commit to the actions.
Doing what you came here to do. That's it. So once you have this I am experience, like you just realize you're just you, and all this languaging that's going on in your head and the labeling and all that kind of self-denigration, they're just words. Notice those words too, as if there were leaves on a stream, diffused from them. Now, let's engage in doing what you came here to do. And so I'm going to put it all together because that's the 6th one, right? The 6th one is just doing what committed actions that you can actually execute. We can measure it. It's overt. And so I'm going to bring it all together. Listen to each step of this sentence. I am. Kind of like your perspective taking, that observing self. I am here now. That's the contact in the present moment. I am here now, accepting the way I feel. Noticing my thoughts or diffusing from my thoughts while doing, like, watching this pitch and see if it's one that I should swing at. Doing what I care about. Is it related to my values? All of it put together. I am here now, accepting the way I feel, noticing my thoughts while doing what I care about. That is right there how you keep a commitment. I think that's what engenders psychological flexibility. I think if you can take this as a typical attitude that you bring to the batter's box, to relationships, to parenting challenges, to your next entrepreneurial endeavor, if you can actually say under those kinds of contexts, because the world keeps changing and we're human beings and we deal with the human condition, what if you can really say, I am here now, accepting the way I feel, noticing my thoughts while doing what I care about? I think that is the map for a life well lived.
Amen. And that each of those are skills that can be strengthened with exercise.
Exactly. Yeah, each one of them has had a lot of research done on them and books written about each one of those 6
Piles
components.
and piles and piles of decades of research.
Yeah, exactly. So those 6 components brought all together in that sentence, I am here now, accepting the way I feel, noticing my thoughts while doing what I care about. That is the core of psychological flexibility, and we know from the research that the more psychologically flexible people are, the lower their scores on measures of psychopathology, and the higher their scores are on quality of life inventories. So if you're struggling with, suffering, if you're wishing you had more quality of life, increase your psychological flexibility. And that phrase right there, I think, will contribute to elevating that.
Amen. And one of the things that's tough in the modern world with thinking about ways we can live our life better and quote unquote research that's out there is it's hard to know how all these components fit together. And that's one of the things psychological flexibility brings us. There's conversations and content you might come across that talks about self-compassion, that talks about discipline and habit formation, that talks about health optimization, that talks about how to strategically achieve your goals, talks about embodying emotions or emotional intelligence, stress regulation.
Right.
There's a big question of which of these matter? How do they relate to each other? And that's a whole nother conversation of challenges within academia of how concepts relate to each other. The nice thing about psychological flexibility is it has decades of research. It is one of the greatest metrics that we have out there as far as a single metric we can point to that shows correlations with health, physical health, performance with athletic tasks, performance with non-athletic tasks, inversely correlated with psychopathology, meaning more psychological flexibility you develop, less likely you're going to experience depression, anxiety, other challenges like that you'd find in the DSM-5 that you'd go to a psychotherapist to get diagnosed with. Right. And so as far as thinking about, well, what am I supposed to do? Psychological flexibility is the goal of the skill that all of us want to be developing in order to cultivate fulfillment in this modern world.
Yeah, I think that what I've been studying for 30 years as a licensed psychologist and I'm board certified in my specialty, I can't, as a blue-collar person, talk namby-pamby nonsense. I can't do the psychobabble thing. I can't as a blue-collar person, and I just refuse to as a board-certified licensed psychologist. So this is why I don't feel like I'm going out on a limb here. Because I've got these blue-collar values and because I'm licensed and board-certified, I have to just say what I know is true in science. And psychological flexibility has been replicated and shown over and over to be a significant contributor to being able to follow through on having a life well lived. And this is not me promoting something. This is truly in the science.
Yeah. And that's why I was excited to talk about you. This conversation has been awesome.
Oh, thanks.
And particularly because if it's not obvious to folks, the intention I'm carrying is when we're talking about the future of work, we're in a very important moment in human history. We have these super cycles going on around us with the way that biotechnology is developing, the way that artificial intelligence is developing. We're on the precipice of some changes that are unlike the scope of change that we have seen in maybe ever, but definitely at least a long time. And at that same time, our trust in institutions has plummeted. Our rates of loneliness have skyrocketed. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. So we have massive challenges ahead of us. Challenges around how we're going to organize certain massive systems, how we're going to decide together what truth is, where we're going to get news, how are we going to regulate the most massive technologies on the planet. And in order to make those difficult decisions, we're going to have to work together. And it's going to be hard. And we're going to have to make difficult decisions. We're going to have to grapple with hard questions. We're going to have to build new systems. And that means what we're going to need are people that are psychologically flexible, that build systems that help each other become more psychologically flexible so we can be our most resourced.
Right. Yeah, with all that technological change that you just mentioned, we're still going to be human beings, and we're still going to have the human condition. And so I think that the way to step up to that and all these challenges that are impending is to be able to accelerate our psychological flexibility.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, DJ, good to see you, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is very cool. I appreciate the opportunity.